You know, he can't even put on his own clothes. He can't do anything without a stage cue from the deacon. I always felt as a deacon, you know, you kind of got to boss people around very obsequiously, because the deacon in our Byzantine rite is always saying, you know, bless master this, bless master that. You know, we were always pointing with RRs, telling the clergy who are superior in rank to us when I was a deacon, telling them what to do very politely. Master, it's time to... and pointing helpfully in case they didn't know what we were talking about. You know, and all those things are in your liturgy book. If you read all the things that the priest and the deacon are saying to each other, that's, you know... but, you know, there's nobody more kind of helpless than the bishop celebrating the liturgy, because he is not the church in his individuality. In case you haven't guessed this, part of the point of this whole talk is that nothing about being in the church is about me and Jesus alone. You know, you should pray to Jesus by yourself, and you should read the Bible by yourself, but that will nourish your hearing the scriptures in the church and your prayer in the church. And your prayer in the church will nourish your private devotion. Your individual salvation and those individual acts of devotion and the time that you spend just you and Jesus are nourished and find their place because you're in the covenant relationship. I would like to run through a couple of things very quickly here. Some things really changed in the way the Orthodox Church was looking at its own internal life. Because, you know, everything I've told you is, you know, what you'll hear from most Orthodox people that will talk about this, and even if they're militating for something unhappy, they will pay lip service to of some sort or another to the ecclesiology which I am describing. So how is it that we live in a church which is centered around a parish and not a bishop? And the bishops represent extensions of churches from abroad and not a local church. So much so that Father Mark Airy, the communications director for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, said in reference to his Beatitude Metropolitan Jonah the following utterly astounding words. Well, okay, I know they don't recognize the Tomos of Autocephaly of the OCA, whatever, but notice the thinking. The churches in America can't but be an extension of something else. He says Metropolitan Jonah seems to think he's his own mother church. You see, every church here must be an extension of something. So he's an extension of himself. Well, you know, Metropolitan Jonah is not his own mother church. The Orthodox Church in America is not an extension of itself, it just is. Or at least it's trying to express an ecclesiology, or hoping to somehow contribute to the point where Orthodoxy in North America just is the church in place. You know, and any particular individual in the OCA, among the first myself, may fail to live up to this. It's not a matter of how well the OCA as a body, as a collection of discrete individuals, lives up to this ecclesiology. It's a matter of this ecclesiology being the ecclesiology of the church, being the ecclesiology which is essential. So two things. And if you want to go a little deeper into the one, you will want to go to Ancient Faith Radio and look at St. Vladimir's summer conference last year. Certainly not this year. Well, that's not on Ancient Faith anyway, but not this year. You want to look at last year and look at the presentation from the communications director, I think that's his title, of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Kiev, Father Kirill Hovorun, who gave a talk on the mythology of autocephaly. Now, in my talk here, I didn't talk a whole lot about autocephaly in the patristic period because there wasn't a whole lot of explicit talk of autocephaly. Though Balsamon, the famous Byzantine medieval canonist, says in principle, every metropolia, every place where there's a country and a metropolitan and a synod, is in principle autocephalous. But autocephaly as a category is not hugely important in the period that our canonical literature was written. The metropolias are clear, but what's even less clear is the autocephaly of a national church. This really doesn't exist. And how much of an Orthodox nationhood do you have to have before you have a patriarchate or a national church? That's a question which is not asked or answered or even possible in the world of the canons. Through the historical vicissitudes of the history of our Orthodox people, we are all one covenant people. And the fact that almost all Orthodox people became subject peoples of the Ottoman Empire and threw off that yoke after the rise of the ideology of nationalism and nation state in Western Europe. It was an idea that came to Eastern Europe from Western Europe. And was particularly championed by the people who did the French Revolution. And young, up-and-coming, smart boys would go from Greece or Serbia or Romania or Bulgaria or the Middle East. They would go off to university in France and learn this great idea of national liberation. Now, most of us will be happy that this led to the majority of the Orthodox people of the Balkans no longer being under the Ottoman Sultan. About that, we are happy. It brought with it the modern conception, which is how we're still mostly working, of a nation state as the entity. And as these churches, now you will find things, for instance, both the Serbian and Bulgarian peoples had patriarchates in the early Middle Ages. And these patriarchates would rise and then they're suppressed, then they rise and then they're suppressed. But they're not patriarchates of a nation state in quite the same way. If you look at what a patriarchate meant in those early medieval periods and what a patriarchate meant in the last 200 years, it didn't quite mean the same thing. Because the patriarchate, the early Bulgarian and Serbian patriarchates had nothing to do with, the Bulgarian patriarchate rises and then it falls, and rises again and then it falls. Neither of the first two Bulgarian patriarchates had to do with recognizing the Bulgarians as a nationality, as an Orthodox nationality. It had to do with understanding that the Bulgarian Tsar at that time had power enough to challenge the Byzantine Emperor on an almost co-equal basis.